Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Audrey Stewart, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am honored to welcome you to tonight's event with Tana French, discussing her latest book, The Searcher. She is joined tonight in conversation by none other than Gillian Flynn. Through good times and bad, Harvard Bookstore will continue to bring authors and their work to our virtual community. Our fall season is in full swing and you don't want to miss out our lineup. Make sure to check out our event schedule at harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our email newsletter and browse our shelves from home, as well as get any holiday gifts you might want. Shop early and shop local. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for questions. If you have a question at any time during the talk, go to the Q&A button on your screen and we'll get through as many as time allows. If you would like to purchase an additional copy of The Searcher, there will be a link in the chat where you can purchase. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you. There will also be a link for donation in the chat if you would like to give additional support to Harvard Bookstore. Without your continued support and patronage, this virtual series wouldn't be possible. You also have an option for closed captioning for this talk. If you would like closed captioning for the event, click the CC button on your screen. Thank you again for tuning in support of our authors, our incredible booksellers, and our landmark independent bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support, especially now. And as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as we can. Thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. Now, I am thrilled to introduce tonight's speakers. Few authors are as deeply beloved as Tana French. The author of 7 books, all of which are amazing, Tana has given us fantastic stories such as In the Woods and The Witch Elm. Her novels have sold over 3 million copies and won numerous awards, including the Edgar, Anthony, McCavity, and Barry Awards, the Los Angeles Times Award for Best Mystery and Thriller, and the Irish Book Award for Crime Fiction. In other words, the woman can write. She is joined by Gillian Flynn. Gillian is the author of Gone Girl, Dark Places, and Sharp Objects. If you haven't heard of those books, I'd recommend you check them out and check out their 3 screen adaptations. Gillian has also written and executive produced the series Utopia. These 2 masters of psychological thriller are here to discuss The Searcher, the story of a boy with a missing brother and a Chicago cop move to Ireland. Tana's new book puts storytelling abilities on great display. I'll leave you with this quote from the Washington Post. Even though her Dublin Murder Squad series and her other standalone mystery, The Witch Elm, have been uniformly excellent, this hushed suspense tale about thwarted dreams of escape may be her best yet. And on that note of praise, I'll turn things over to our speakers. Tana, Gillian, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm thrilled to have you both here. The virtual stage is yours.
Hello.
Hello.
There we are.
Yeah,
Uh,
we found each other.
yes, I mean, finally, I just have to
Yeah.
say for everyone, tuning in, I think it's so strange that we haven't met in person before. I feel like I'm your shadow, like I'm always being compared to you, which I love, and I feel like we're
Yeah.
often on book tours, like I'm one step behind you or
Yeah.
something. So it's such a treat to finally like get to hang out and talk, even virtually.
Yeah. Same here. I have loved your books for a long time, and we've swapped a couple of emails, but somehow never managed to meet. And I'm always, people do occasionally like put me in the same sentence as you, and I'm always very flattered and honored. So yeah, we need to hang out in person, but for now, this is
Yeah.
great.
This is great. Well, I mean, congratulations. I loved this book. I mean, from the very second you open, I felt like there was such a sense of relief, really, that I was in such good hands. I was kind of like, when like you have a, I don't know, massage therapist and you're just like, oh, this is gonna be good. This is gonna make me so happy. And just like even early on the first page, like I love your sense of place. Like you have this wonderful sense of place. And I just have to read because I know authors love having their stuff read back to them. But I just, the air is talking about Ireland, and the air is rich as fruitcake. Like you should do more with it than just breathe it. Bite off a big mouthful, maybe, or rub handfuls of it over your face. I just like I mean, I love your sense of place, and I love. I love the psychology of your thrillers, and I'd love to hear kind of what you think your best version, your personal best version of a thriller or a mystery should be? What are you usually trying to accomplish? Sorry, that was a
Oh,
giant question. That was
that's huge. That's a huge, great one. We were
who
talking
are
about
you?
it beforehand, actually, just sort of in the agreement. We were talking about how both of us had read Dennis Lehane, who I think was a massive gift to our generation of mystery writers,
Yes.
because so many of us read Mystic River. It's always Mystic River, and went, oh my God, you can do this? Because it's not just a mystery, it's a family saga, it's a social history, it's a coming of age story, it's a
Neighborhood, family loyalty. Yeah.
yeah, friendship, all of it. And you suddenly, you're this sort of young writer starting out thinking about it, and it's a revelation because you realize that these aren't just whodunits, or don't have to be, that you have the option of making a mystery story into a window into a whole world where it's insights into how human beings work, how they interact with their place, and how how the roots of place and family can intertwine into something powerful and dangerous. And I think that Mystic River sort of acted as a trigger going, I want to be doing this, or at least I want to be trying to do this, to use this genre as a way into human minds and human interactions. So yeah, that's what started it all off, and that's probably still what I'm aiming for, is to use it as a way into how people work, how they interact, and the big questions like, what can take somebody, what combination of circumstances can take somebody to the point of the huge step of killing another person.
Yes. Yes. And okay, first on Dennis Lehane, which is, I mean, I had the same revelation, which was I was trying to write my first book, Sharp Objects, and I wanted to write about female violence and what that looked like cyclically, generationally, how that was handed down, and how that looked different from male violence, which we've read about for hundreds and hundreds of years. But I couldn't figure out what to do with it, and I kept having women standing in rooms talking about violence, and then I'd move them to a different room. I couldn't figure out what to do, and I had the same thing. I remember bringing Mystic River home one night and reading the whole thing straight through and going like, like this will give me the engine and the discipline and the shape. And I've been doing that ever since. It was such a revelation to me. And I love, okay, I'm going to quote you one more time, which is a newspaper article that I read. But I just love the way you put this when you're talking about murder and it wouldn't have happened in another place or even a few years earlier. In the mystery novels I love best, the murder becomes a window into the heart of the society where it happens. And, I just think Searcher is such a devastating way to get into that, and I love the feel of it from the very beginning. I mean, it's where you are, and I don't know Ireland very well, despite my name.
A very Irish name on it.
It's very grandparents, yes, but I need to explore more. You know where you are, and you know what kind of you feel that little town, even if you haven't been there. And so I wonder, to me, from the beginning, I felt like I was in, it was part Straw Dogs, part, Great Western part, it had all these elements. So once again, I'm just babbling at you with my question, but you're gonna have to parse it out. But I'd love to hear kind of the initial seed of it, because it does feel different to me from some of your books, but still very you. Yeah.
Good.
The best compliment I can get, right?
Thank you. No, I've been reading a lot of Westerns. Pat Anderson, who writes for the Washington Post, had said, you need to read Lonesome Dove. So I went, okay. I'd never read a Western before. And I was fascinated by the genre, and read more, and True Grit, of course, which is one of the all-time great. The Sisters Brothers was my other favorite. And I liked a lot of the elements of it. And I started realizing that a lot of them, the settings have a lot of resonances with the West of Ireland. And I had never written a rural novel really before. All the others are set in Dublin, which is a place I know best. But I've always loved the West of Ireland since I was a teenager. It's the other bit of Ireland that I love best. I was thinking, it's got this same Western feel of this. I mean, there's this harsh countryside that demands real mental and physical toughness out of anyone who wants to make a living from it. But there's also this sense of this place that is not just geographically, but also culturally, very distant from the centers of power, to the point where the people feel like the power brokers have no idea about their lives and probably don't care. And if they want a cohesive society, they're going to have to make the rules and enforce them themselves within their own small, tight society. And that is, you know, a factor, very much a theme in Irish drama as well. You get great plays like The Playboy of the Western World and The Field, two of the greatest Irish dramas ever, which are very much around that idea of the little village somewhere remote and how they make and enforce their own rules. So I was thinking very much in what would happen if you tried to translate some of the Western tropes to the west of Ireland? How would they gel? And the one that I really kind of got hooked on was the idea of the stranger in town. Because you know how he shows up in all the Westerns and he sort of rolls into the saloon and he's got secrets of his own maybe, and you're not quite sure what he's doing there, but you know things are going to change around him. He's going to be a catalyst. You don't know whether he's going to shoot the corrupt sheriff and set things to rights, or else he's going to shoot the hero and like break the heroine's heart, or he's going to get shot himself because he reveals secrets. But you know he's going to disrupt this established order that the little town has come up with itself. So I started thinking, well, what do you get if you get like this stranger in town? And again, he's at the heart of The Playboy in the Western World and of The Field. So I thought he might be a good point for those two genres to intersect. That's where it came out. The other thing was actually, sorry, now I'm kind of going on.
Go.
The other thing was I just come off writing The Witch Elm, which is a really introspective book because, you know, the premise is the character is this really lucky, easygoing guy who's had a head injury, a brain injury. And because of this, his mind is no longer the same place. And that's probably the real sort of locus of the action of the book, is inside his head. So it's a really interior, introspective book. And I was done with introspection. I wanted to write a character who was mainly about action. And so that's where Cal came out of. He's a stranger in town, and he is very much, which is another Western trope, the man of action. He doesn't think it matters particularly what you think, what you feel, what you say. Those aren't the things that define you. What defines you is what you do. And
yes,
that made a very nice change for me. That was a switch.
I mean, it's such a great trope to explore. And I wonder it's such an interesting thing to think about societally, why we are so consistently afraid of small towns and afraid of, why there is that, from everything from, like I said, straw dogs to even Children of the Corn, like this idea, this idea of, coming into a society and not quite knowing the rules. And I think there's something about not knowing the rules, and so you don't know if you're breaking them or not.
Yeah.
That can be
very... Also the rules go so deep in a small town because everybody's known each other for generations. And so these rules have been refined and fortified over hundreds of years. So you don't have a hope of ever really understanding them. You can only hope that you don't put your foot in it.
Right. The people who live there probably don't even understand part of it. I mean, I'm rooted in a big Irish Catholic family, and we have miniature feuds that go back to 3 generations that none of us entirely know about, and it goes back to like the cat on the piano or some strange phrase that we don't entirely So how can
in 1894?
Yeah, exactly.
And Irish small towns do secrecy as well, very well. So it's not just that there are all these rules you don't understand, there are all these secrets and these silences that are very strongly enforced and that you don't break. And it's one of the things that I think it's quite new to Cal. I mean, Irish society in general is very, very good on enforced secrecy. It's one of the things that run through Ireland's history and Ireland's present as well. I mean, the one that's on my mind right now is the Department of Health, the government, recently stopped all contact tracing and testing in schools, right? If there's a case in schools, there's no contact tracing, there's no testing. And they issued guidance telling school principals not to tell any parents if there's a case in the class. Everyone's just supposed to come to school. Now, I've got a copy of the guidance. The exact wording is, public health do not recommend that you tell parents of other children that there is a COVID-19 case in your class/facility/group. And I think this is kind of stunning to anyone anywhere else. But there's this Irish idea culturally that if you can enforce silence about something, it no longer exists. It happened with the Magdalen laundries. It happened with abuse in industrial schools. It's happening now, that if you can enforce silence, it's gone. And of course, Cal comes in to this village where there are enforced silences. And he starts, not even voluntarily, but breaking the enforced silences. And so he's resurrecting the word I'm looking for, not embodying, but he's making something into a reality again that had been stripped of its reality by common consent almost, and enforced silence. So
they buried their bodies, and then he kind of dug around and like started, a little bit of, not fully understanding, I think, entirely what he was getting into in the,
Not at all.
And I think if you don't understand how deep a secret is, you can minimalize it, and I think that's the key also to secrets is that idea of, like you said, if we buried it and we're all agreeing never to discuss this, then it didn't happen. So tell me, educate me a little bit. What is it about Irish history that you think, because this informs the book so much of that idea. So, do you think it's particular to Ireland, or it's a particular strain of it, of secret keeping?
Well, I do. I think some of it has to do with 7 centuries of being colonized, and quite brutally colonized at some points. Things like your language and your religion at certain points were not allowed, were absolutely forbidden. And so silence and enforced silence become very much a way of life, and getting around the silences, finding ways to live around them, and finding ways to sneak things past the rules and sneak things past the silences and to coexist with them. That becomes a way of life if it's so brutally enforced on you, even to the point on a literal level where the Irish language was banned, where you can't even learn your own language. That's a very strong and powerful form of enforced silence. But then you get, when Ireland gained independence, which is only 100 years ago, like that's not a long time. It's a very young, raw country finding its way. It went basically fully into Catholic Church, under the Catholic Church's authority. It went from British rule to Catholic rule. And there were, of course, a lot of things that the Catholic Church didn't want said, didn't want visible, didn't want heard. A lot of voices, because you've got to fulfill this image of this perfect, holy, Catholic, idyllic place. And anything that didn't match that image had to be silenced, had to be suppressed. So I think that's kind of a cultural perfect storm that's only starting to come to an end in the last couple of decades. But of course, the residue is very, very deep, just mentally. You can get rid of the fact, you can start bringing things to light, but the instinct culturally to just silence something and then it doesn't exist, that takes a lot longer to erode.
Absolutely becomes part of the fabric of society. And I recently just saw the Magdalene Sisters, that amazing film, and wow, it's a brutal story, but worth telling. And again, how much do you feel that your books, when you discuss these type of like the Celtic tiger, and you just do such a great job with your books exploring different things about Ireland. Do you find that is a welcome balm for most people, or have you gotten pushback because it is uncovering secrets and talking about what used to not be talked about?
I think I get away with less pushback, weirdly enough, because it's genre, because it's mystery, which is the upside of the fact. I mean, I'm sure you get this all the time, where people they don't see it as a serious book dealing with serious issues, but it's a mystery, it's a whodunit, and so it's not filed in the same category as a book that's put on the literary fiction shelf in the bookshelf, and so it's not seen as being something quite as controversial or something with quite as much disruptive power, which, I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. I think, of course, it's going to depend on whether the readers see it as something with disruptive power rather than whether the critics see it in that same way. But I think I haven't got that much pushback. I mean, you get the occasional person pointing out that, like Broken Harbor, for example, which is probably by a long shot, my most depressing book, is about the crash of the Celtic tiger and is about the national madness that was stoked very deliberately by politicians and bankers to get people buying into a property Ponzi scheme, essentially. but it didn't really cause any controversy or argument or shock when it came out. Because it's mystery, it's genre. You don't have to take it seriously. But I think, again, the important thing is whether the readers are finding more in it or not.
I mean, that is why I write mysteries, is so that I can talk about those things and sort of, it's like sneaking in the vegetables into the chocolate sundae and like giving, and to people who write it off, I always say, well, I have more readers than you do, so like,
So there.
it's like more. I would so much rather people read what I write than respect what I write and not read it. Everyone has those piles of books that that are, you feel like it's your duty to read, but you just can't quite get. It's like, oh, every other week I promise I'll read this one, whereas you can say some really serious, interesting, smart stuff, and I always say, like, people who want to dig into that will find it, and people who just want a mystery, that's great too, but I feel like we should be getting toward the end of people writing off mystery as a genre. It just feels time to me that people, like you, Kate Atkinson, and all these wonderful writers who can, that tell a real serious story and do it as a page turner that you can't put down. That's magic to me. Like, I admire that so much.
I don't think it should be anymore. I think it's a tired, old idea that it's either or. Either you can have the literary fiction, which has like deep characterization and beautiful writing, but maybe not much plot, or you can have the genre stuff, which is a page turner, but it's like workman-like prose at best and sort of two-dimensional characters. That's old, that's tired, and I like writing mystery. I like trying for both. I like trying to have it all. Now, whether I do or not is up for grabs, but I don't see why I should be limited just because this is the way it's always been done. I've never been very good at taking the rules as an end point rather than a starting point. The rules are fine, but they're an interesting thing to play with. They're not like set in stone here.
I mean, and that's how I approach my stuff too. And it's funny you say rules, because I'm curious about, I want to hear about if you do research, if you went to like, little towns in the West just to get the vibe for this, or kind of how you do it, because my way of going in is always, I kind of write the book and then I run it by, a cop, or I run it by a lawyer, whoever I need to run it by to make sure. And my question's always like, I don't care if this would happen, but could it possibly happen?
Even
I
once,
really
just
need
one
it to
time.
happen. Yeah, just tell me what to tweak here. So how do you approach it? I know I'll say one last thing. I know for Gone Girl, I was trying to get the feel of, really get I always kind of sell my books in either Missouri or Kansas, which is where I grew up. And I knew exactly where I wanted this town to be. I knew exactly on the map. I could point to it. And when I was 8.5 months pregnant, and my mom and I took a road trip from Chicago all the way through Missouri back home to Kansas City. We had pictures of me just like boom, boom in the middle of summer. But I took notes, and they ended up, like I felt like it nourished my story. It didn't feel totally necessary, like that, like it would have been lesser without it, but it felt like my soul for writing was nourished by just feeling it and sweating through those towns, I guess.
Yeah, I know. I need to. It's not that any of the places in my books are based on real places exactly, but I need to know what kind of place it would have been. Now, I've spent a fair bit of time in the west of Ireland, so I had a good, deep sense of that. But it has to be places, even if it's, obviously it's not a real place, but it's places I'm familiar with. Those are the textures, the smells, how the roads work, what the texture is when you're walking up somewhere, what it feels like when dark comes in, how quickly or slowly does the dark come in. That's what makes a place real to people. And places are really important to me. When I'm writing my books, I think places get so charged for us with emotion, with memory, with the things we bring to them and hope to get from them, and things that we actually do get from them. They're really charged up. within people's experience. A place can be so powerful. So I need to know those details in order to give the place that power for the main character. So I do that kind of stuff. I tend to know before. It's one of the first things I know about a book. Like when I start writing a book, I know, got a clear sense of the main character, clear sense of the core location, and a basic premise. And that's where I start. But I do all the other research as I go. I don't go back on it, because I found that it tends to give me new ideas. Like, if I'm lucky, I have a retired detective who is willing to answer the most ridiculous number of mad questions for me, but also to tell stories which answer the questions I didn't even know I needed to ask. Like, I don't even know where to start sometimes. But if I sit down with him when I'm starting a book and go, hey, I'm doing this, could this happen? And he does that. And then, of course, he segues into some huge story about this one time in 1995 when he and his partner were out doing this thing. And suddenly I've got an idea, not from the story he tells maybe, but from some tiny bit about interaction he describes between him and his partner that pinpoints a dynamic that I hadn't thought of before. And I'm going off in a whole new direction. It's fed into the book in a way that I didn't expect. So I do the research as I go, not only for the facts, but for the little ideas I didn't expect to pop up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's those fun little sideways things where you have that moment of like, I did not know I was interested in this, but I am very interested in this, and let's go down this road. I remember when I was writing my second book, which was Dark Places, and it was kind of about the satanic panic that was happening across America in the 80s, where people actually thought there were Satan worshipers. Well, not unlike QAnon these days, I guess, but I will not get into that. So it was set on a farm. And so I had a farmer friend that I was running, just like what you say, by like, okay, how much, tell me like about manuring the fields, and tell me about, and then what time would you do this? And he finally stopped when I sent a question saying, if you had to axe murder a cow, how long would it take? And it was just like silence.
Like, you're on a list right there. I've also got a doctor friend who I occasionally texted or emailed going things like, okay, I need to kill somebody, but I don't have a lot of weapons, and I need them to take like 20 minutes to die. And I'm actually kind of smaller than them, so I kill them in a way that I can do while being small. He'll be like, you are on so many lists right now. Like, okay, fine. But
we are. Yes, we are. Do you read true crime, or do you watch true crime, or what's your relationship to true crime? Because I have a very conflicted relationship myself personally toward my consumption.
Yeah, I don't really, because I get upset because there are people out there hurting, and I end up imagining what it must be like to be in their place. I read historical true crime. I really like historical true crime, partly because whoever killed the princes in the tower, nobody is now hurting from it.
Oh, you and I have so much to talk about. Oh my gosh. I love Alison Weir. I love her Tudor books, and
we're gonna argue over this
one. The Six Wives. Oh my word. So many thoughts on that. But yes, I do understand that, where it's you feel like the pain has been buried for at least a couple hundred years.
But also it's the good true crime books. It's like what we were talking about earlier with the good crime novels. They're a window straight into another time and place. Like the good true crime stuff. I mean, if you look at Kate Summerscale, for example, stuff like that, where all of a sudden it's not just about a single crime. It's about the entire world in which it takes place, and how this crime stemmed out of this world, and how the process of the investigation was shaped by this world, how people were like us and weren't like us, and how their assumptions were different from ours, and their experiences were the same or different. That's what I love, is that because murder is so, I mean, it's a universal crime. It happens in every society, but it's defined by its society at the same time. They're obvious example, in a nomadic society, you are not going to have somebody being murdered over ownership of a piece of land. But in 1950s Ireland, in a country where ownership of land is so deeply charged and rooted in colonial trauma, and in fact, you could have somebody murdered over a piece of land.
Yes.
You do in Ireland have people murdered over ownership of land. And so, but that fact tells you something instantly about that society and its history. The minute you find out that A murdered B for ownership of land, you know something. And the more you find out about a crime, the more you find out about the society. And that's why I love the historical true crime, because it's your window in instantly.
I just read, I may get this wrong. I think it's called Bad Blood by John Carreyrou, he pronounces it. He was a Wall Street Journal amazing reporter, and it's about the Theranos scandal, which is Silicon Valley and people buying into it, and it has that same fever feel of the Celtic Tiger, this where people, you have to fake it till you make it, like you oversell what you're selling, but people are so like, technology is huge. So like, let's invest in technology. And
It's technology, it must be
who
good. Yeah.
knows, that might be the next Google. We got to get in there. And so for me, who doesn't know, I don't read the business part of the newspaper usually, and I don't know tons about Silicon Valley or technology. It's not something I would normally read, self-select to read, because it would intimidate me. But I highly recommend it, because it really does give you a feel for what society is right now, like right now, especially in America, the millennial generation, and thinking. It was so good. But that was a long way of saying, I agree. It's like those, I love the true crime where it makes me really feel like I'm understanding what society is right at that time, or what a neighborhood is, or what a family is, any of that sort of stuff where, it branches off, and it's not just, not just those moments of gore.
Yeah.
I try to be, I sort of treat it like it's, it is someone's tragedy, and that you have to be not, making sure you're not consuming it like that. I don't feel
Yeah.
good about that, but I feel like, your writing is just so, I don't know. I was asking that question because I feel like it's this dreamy, amazing combination that I wish that I aspire to have someday, which is like, it feels like that all the gritty and detaily information, it feels like you used to be a hardcore journalist or something, because all the information that I need is there, but it's this beautiful lyrical writing that I just love to be in. So it's such an amazing combination. And as a writer, tell me about writing in present tense, because that's what I'm trying to do with my book right now, and I can't tell if it's right. I can't tell if it's the right choice or not. Did you have any trouble? Do you transition?
I've done it a couple of times. I did in The Trespasser and again in The Searcher. And for part of The Secret Place, because it flips back and forth between viewpoints.
That's why I asked, because you do it so seamlessly between the two.
Thank you. Okay, for me, right, I blame this on the fact that I was an actor before I was a writer, right? So for me, everything's about the character. That's the only way I know how to work it. And it's very much, especially if you mainly write first person, which I do, it's very much the same skill. It is about making this character as three-dimensional and real as possible, and then inviting your audience in, letting them in as intimately as is possible, so that they come out feeling like they know this character more intimately than they know the best friends. Every corner of this character's mind. I mean, the ultimate example of this in many ways, I think, is Donna Tartt, where if you read her books, you know this character, you know them so intimately, more so than your best friend. But if you're coming from that perspective, where the character is the first thing, which is what I do, it's why I don't have a plot when I start writing, which is because you're flying by the seat of your pants, because then you need to get to know the characters first before you can know who would do what to whom and for what reason. That makes for a lot of rewriting, because you hit chapter 4 and go, oh my God, that person would totally do this, and have to go rewrite chapter 2.
But don't you think that's the magic and the fun of writing? I would never want to. It takes me longer, but I would never want to fully plot out things, because I like to see where my characters take me. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think.
Yeah, no, me too. I like the surprise, and I hope some of it transfers to the audience where they have the surprise. But that means that the character, for me, dictates a lot about the book. And one of those things is some of my books have slight supernatural tinges here and there, and some of them really don't. And that's because for some of the characters, like In the Woods has in places a slight supernatural tinge, because for the narrator, for Rob, reality is this shaky, cracked, unreliable place. Whereas in Faithful Place, for example, there is absolutely no supernatural. because the world of the book is set by the narrator, for whom there is no supernatural, and he has no time for this nonsense. So the world of the book is dictated very much for me by the protagonist. And some protagonists are much more like immediate and based in the present than others. So if you've got somebody like Cal or like Antoinette in The Trespasser, who has very little time for anything but the immediate and the present and dealing with it, then your present tense feels right. Whereas if you've got somebody like Robin in the Woods or Toby in Witch Elm, who are very much struggling with the tension between past and present, and the past is very real to them and very much a force within the present, that immediacy didn't feel right. It had to be third person. So it's dictated by the character. Is that what you're finding as well? Are you writing present tense because of that, because the character demands it?
It feels like it to me, but I have never written in present tense before. I do, go back and forth between first person, and I feel very comfortable doing that. And that the characters definitely tell me if they want to be speaking for themselves or not. Like that's very clear to me. But I don't know if I'm doing it because I just want to try it, or if I'm doing it because the character is screaming for it. Right now, she seems to be really wanting to speak in present tense, and she's really experiencing a moment of having her skin peeled off and being reborn, like in a painful way, like having to reconstruct her entire identity, and rethink about who she is to her soul. And so she's in this moment of like crisis, and so it feels welcome to our workshop, everyone.
I cannot wait to read this. I just have to say, I cannot wait.
So I was so curious about that, because you do it, like I said, you do it so well. So you kind of know pretty early on if it's, do you know, you were talking about how well you know your characters. This is such a specific question, but do you know what your characters look like in your mind? Could you say what they look like?
Yeah, I would recognize
of our writers, because sometimes you say like, I have no idea what their face looks like. I don't know, like I threw red hair on them because I wanted to keep going or something, and that's always interesting to me because I feel like I always know pretty well what my characters look like.
Yeah, no, I'd recognize any of them if I ran into them on the street. Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel. Is like I know that I'm going the right direction if I'm, already feeling like my character's standing next to me. Like I remember, Amy in Gone Girl took over so much of my mind space, and I would be in the grocery line, and someone would have 10 items instead of 8 to check out, and I'd be like, oh, Amy would not like that. Amy would be walking up there right now, and that's what, like, it's like, oh, I'm living with them now, which doesn't make me always the most delightful human to be around, but it works great.
No, but it's useful because there's so much that you need to know as a writer that never needs to go on the page, or maybe needs to go on the page, but the reader never needs to read it. It needs to get cut before you ever get to print. There's a lot you need to know.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, I think you and I will have to have another writer's workshop, a weekly one, but I think we'll get to some Q&A here if I can figure out how to do it. Q&A. Oh, easy. Here's from Roger Payne. I really love The Searcher. Might you bring Cal back?
No, actually, okay. The original plan was that this is a once-off, right? This is standalone, one and done. I had an idea for another book and everything. But when the pandemic kicked in, there's lockdown. I had 2 small kids doing distance learning, which is basically like having 2 Tasmanian devils and 1 iPad.
Sure with you, yes.
Right there. And so and also my head was fried. I think for all of us, everybody's head was fried for the first, 9 months of this pandemic. And you sort of come to realize that as a writer, you're really reliant on your subconscious. When it became clear that none of us had a subconscious, all our bandwidth was used up, and our subconsciouses were just, scorched earth. And so instead of getting stuck straight into the next book, because I had just handed in The Searcher when we went into lockdown a week or so earlier, I had nothing with which to get stuck into the next book. I had an idea, but nothing. And then the kids finally went back to school, and I was going, do you know what I don't think I have enough brain to come up with an entirely new world and new characters. And I realize I don't actually want to. What I'd like to write about, what I really want to write about, is go back there to the world of the searcher, because I think there's more candy in the piñata, basically. I think I'd like to find out what happens to these characters next. So completely by accident, not my plan, I seem to be writing a sequel to Searcher set about 2 years later. And I'm having fun with it. I'm enjoying being back there, and I really hope readers do too.
What I mean, it's a great sign. I've never done a series. I've never done a revisit of any characters, but I know exactly what all my characters are doing right now, and
Yeah.
I'd love to catch up with them.
I've never done a sequel before either, so it's a whole new technique, because you have to go, how much from the last book do I put in? Oh, I don't want spoilers, but for people who haven't
I
read
also
it,
don't
they
wanna have,
need to
I don't want to have 2 pages of explaining what happened in the previous book, which is
yeah.
always
You
in
know,
trouble having to figure out what you want to do. Let's see. Rachel Strother says, what was the significance of the title, The Trespasser? She was curious about the meaning.
that title, I don't think I was the one who came up with it. I think that was the publishers, because I was kind of struggling with titles and finding different things. But The Trespasser, I like titles that work in more than one way, right? I like titles that could apply to more than one thing or to more than one character. And I think there are a lot of characters in that book who could be defined as the trespasser, because they have, in one way or another, trespassed within someone else's space, intruded in places where they shouldn't be. But there's also the fact that Antoinette, the main character, spends much of the book feeling like she either is or is being seen as a trespasser within her own world. And it's only towards the end of the book that she realizes, no, actually, I have every right to be here and to claim my space here. And it's not, in fact, as alien or as unfriendly a space as I thought. And she doesn't have to feel like she's a trespasser within her own world anymore. So I think at the end, it comes down to her and her sense of herself within her world of the murder squad.
That is an amazing answer. I think if someone asked me the question of mine, I'd be like,
It's a really cool question. I hadn't put it into words before, so thank you.
Yes. Oh man. Any chance we could see sorry, this is Nia Patel. Could see The Searcher made into a film or TV show?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't. I'm kind of a little wary of putting any books on screen, because it's so easy for them to have nothing to do with the book, and then that's a very strange experience as a writer. I know you wrote the script for Gone Girl, didn't you? So that's a whole different thing. That's knowing where you're going, being able to take it on the journey. But I don't know if that's something that I would necessarily know how to do or anything like that. And I don't know. There are certain directors.
Or if you want to do, it's like you start, when you start measuring out your creative time,
Yeah.
for me, it's often, who I'm working with. Like if David Fincher, yes, I will do anything, no problem. It's and I have a love for it because my dad was a film professor, so I grew up with movies, and my mom taught reading. So I was lucky to grow up in a house where story was really valued. So for me, it's fun to kind of dip back and forth in that world a little bit.
These are your native tongues, basically.
Yeah,
Film and story, yeah.
I feel very comfortable. I can. I think even as I'm writing, like I call them, I always say like I'm writing a scene, and I do see it as like a specific moment, a specific scene, not like I'm planning it at all for a movie, but for me in my head, it's like it's one container of like, today I'm gonna write this scene. So here's from Ellen LaRoche. What is a book that you loved so much and would reread? I love those kind of questions. Like,
Me too. Yeah, it's where do I start? Oh my God,
I could go on exactly.
Okay, at least two of my favorite rereads. I have reread Watership Down more times than I can count. I first read it when I was 7, the summer I was 7, and how much does a 7-year-old get of this book? I only got.
You get it. I read it really young too, but you
Yeah.
get the tone of it. There's something about it that seeps into you, right?
Yeah. and you can feel that this is powerful. It's so beautifully written that you can feel the power coming through the sentences, even if you don't understand all the words, or even if you don't fully grasp what's going on in a scene, you can feel the power of it. You can feel the arc anyway, just because it's so well written. And I've reread it, I don't know, a dozen times since then, it must be. And there's something new I find in there every time. And it is still a book that pulls a tear out of me every time, and still a book that makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck in that one scene where they're in the ditch and they hear the name being called. Yeah, still gets me after all this time. So that's one of my favorite rereads. And then the other one, just for sheer beauty of language, is Under Milk Woods, Dylan Thomas. Like,
oh, I don't know that. I haven't read that one.
It's a radio play, actually, officially, but just
gotcha.
so beautiful. It's just
I'm writing it down right now.
Yeah, it's he basically creates this little Welsh village from night through a day to night and lets you wander through it. He just takes you wandering through it, meeting different characters. But some of the writing is just so beautiful that you're left sitting there with your mouth open going, all right, fine, I'm just not even going to do any work today because forget it.
Exactly.
That's gorgeous. So
I will submit to this book.
Yeah.
Let's see. Here's a good one from Sophie Grossman. Thank you for our great conversation. I'd love to hear what you each do to get your creative juices flowing when you feel stuck.
Oh man. Okay. You want to go first? I'll go first.
I eat a lot of Good and Plenty, Sophie. I stock up on my little Good and Plenty candies, black licorice. But here's what I actually do is I don't ever let myself stop writing. What I will do is do these really weird, kind of almost, high school type of creative writing course thing where I'll write a specific scene that I know won't go into the book at all. So I'll write maybe a character's dream that night, or I'll write, to figure out Nick and Gone Girl and Amy. I was writing scenes of them, Amy at boarding school and what from her roommate's point of view, which was so fun, and Nick when his parents, who were always feuding, go to a parent teacher conference. And just number one, it keeps me writing, and number two, I usually figure out something. And people sometimes mention the cool girl speech monologue that Amy gives in Gone Girl.
Great monologue. That's such a good
So that was just a total creative writing exercise that I did one day, dashed it off in a day because I was so stuck on this other scene. And again, my rule is not to I can't put those in the book, and so I put it in the book and I take it back out and I put it in the book. I was like, I don't know, it doesn't belong here. Yes, it does. So I finally left it in. I'm very glad. How about you?
I kind of do the opposite. I'm a fidget. I'm an actual fidget. I always have to be moving. I always have to be doing several things at once. And I go for long walks if it's not working, because it was a really weird process for me finding out what to do with the days when it's not working. Because again, I'm coming from acting. If you're having a day as an actor when you're just stupid and nothing is happening, then your scene partner will throw something at you that sparks something, or the director will say, try it this way, or somebody will throw you something that will get you on a different track or get you thinking differently. But when you're writing, it's you. And there you are having a stupid day and having to unstupid yourself with no help.
Yes, I like that.
So I go for long walks. Because again, I think better when I'm moving. I like being moving. So I go for long walks, and I generally find that if I go for a long walk with music on and just let my head drift, then by the end, there's some sentence or some paragraph just turning over in my head, starting to find a rhythm, starting to find a shape, or there's some little interaction between two characters, or, oh, this character might have a motivation that I hadn't suspected, and there's some little in. But I think kind of at heart, we're both doing the same thing. We're trying to sneak in on it from the side.
Exactly. That's what I always say. Like, I never write a first sentence of a book. I deliberately will start, what I think is going to be a few paragraphs later, because it feels too much. It feels too much to be like, I am now sitting down to write my novel. It's like, I just have to sneak up on it. It's like, you won't know novel. I'm slowly capturing you. Exactly. Let's see. From Kelsey Cook. a question for you both. How much do people from your own lives and events from your own pasts inform characters and events in your books? If any of your personal experiences creep in, is that ever uncomfortable for you? Or do you hesitate to bring that in or embrace it?
I don't do that at all. I don't use people from my real life. I don't use events. I don't use any of that because I find it limits me, because then I'm stuck with what the person would actually do. I'm stuck with what actually happened. And that probably isn't. I was going to say that may not be what the book needs, but in fact, it probably isn't what the book. And so I don't do anything like that. And I don't use, like, people will go, are some of your characters, you in some ways? I'm going, no, that's boring. I'm me all day long. When I'm writing, I want the chance to see what the world would look like through somebody else's eyes. So no, I'm making stuff up.
I often find that if I catch myself doing that, it's because I basically have writer's block, and I'm just trying to figure out, I need to figure out the character on my own, but I'm stealing this moment that's not going to work at all. And I'll also not catch myself, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, stop, because I'm the same way. It's like, no, I want everything to be completely my own. And I also never want to co-opt anyone's story.
Yeah, that too.
When I was doing Sharp Object, and some of it has to do with, self-harm and self-cutting. And people asked me if I, interviewed or talked to, people who cut, and I was like, I didn't read anything, I didn't talk to anyone, because I did not want to co-opt anyone else's story. Like, that is a very private and personal trauma, and I didn't even want to risk anything feeling like that. And again, it's like, I want to use my own imagination and feel what that would be.
It's a hard one when you're dealing with anything of which anything sensitive, anything traumatic of which you have no personal experience. It's a really hard one to know how to go about it. With Witch Elm was the big one for me, where it's traumatic brain injury. I mean, this can transform people's entire lives, in some cases devastate people's entire lives. And I was going, I need to do this justice. If I'm going to do this, I need to do it right. I can't trivialize, I can't, make light of it, and I can't get it wrong. So I kind of did the opposite. I read the whole internet when it comes to traumatic brain injury. Yeah. I read every form, because I didn't want to talk to anybody, because I figured if I was talking to people, I'm going to be asking the questions that I want to ask, which may not be the questions that somebody wants. That may not be the stuff that someone wants me to know. You
sometimes don't even know the questions to ask.
Yeah, so, I don't know the questions. So I just read every forum for survivors of traumatic brain injury, their stories, what they wanted to say, and then tried to bring that on board without using any of it. Because you're right, you can't use any specific, because that's stealing. That's taking somebody's story. You cannot do that. So yeah, I just read it all and then tried to ditch every specific and just take the underlying essentials. It's tough, because this is serious stuff that we sometimes deal with. Yes. And you've got to take that seriously. If you want to be an ethical writer, you have to take that very seriously.
Mm-hmm. I find I have a sticky brain. I read things and I'll consume it in weird ways, and I just never. So that's why I never read anything that's too close, because I worry, like, my brain's like a little magpie. I find it's not often useful, but it will grab certain details or certain moments, and I can't control it. Here's one from Jay Burton. How did Miss French learn to write such gorgeous prose? Did you take writing courses? And what writers of either prose or plays do you feel influenced you the most?
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you very much. I haven't taken any writing courses, but I have always read a lot, read everything I could get my hands on, including when I was a kid, some stuff that probably was either way too old for me, like Watership Down, or inappropriate. I mean, my mom gave me, when I was 11, she gave me Mary Renault's Theseus books, because we were going for our first family sun holiday. We were going to Crete on our way from one continent to another. A weird childhood. But she gave me The King Must Die and The Bull from the Sea, which are almost definitely not appropriate reading for an 11-year-old. But she went, you love writing, you love reading, and these are so good. These are such good books that they can't do you any harm. And they're beautifully written. And the sense of rhythm and drive and depth of world that go through those books are so powerful that I think those may be among the ones that stuck with me the most, just the way sentences are constructed, the way sentences are built. I think that's where I learned to write, was off reading so many books and sticking with the ones that sparked something in me, the ones that I recognize as being beautifully written, and just reading them over and over and over again, without necessarily understanding why they were beautifully written or how this was achieved or what it was that made these sentences hit me so hard. But yeah, again, things like Watership Down and Under Milk Woods are definitely in there.
I think it's good for kids to read inappropriate material. I think it's good. You know, I'm the same way as you. My son's 11 and my daughter's 7, and there's some things we read together, and there's some movies we watch together, and I just say, you know, you guys know that this doesn't happen in the real world. Or, you know, it's sort of like a bit, but you know, that's how my parents were too. Like, um, they were very great about, like, you're smart enough to figure out, you know, if it's too scary, if it's too much, if you know, and they really, and yes, sometimes things that by them maybe shouldn't have every once in a while, but I like that there's something worthwhile in that sense of exploring that a kid gets when and having their own say in the worlds that they want to enter. I think is a really valuable way to help kids, you know, with judgment and you know, it was thought provoking. And I remember the first time I ever talked back to my mom was when I was reading Wrinkle in Time.
Oh
And
yeah.
you know, I'm in the last 30 pages or something, and she's calling me down to dinner, and it's like, Mom, no, no. And I brought the book to dinner, like, Gillian, put the book down. That was a worthwhile argument.
Oh, I miss that. Because now, you know, we're grown-ups, we have kids. You can't kind of do this immersive reading thing. And I can remember I was total immersion reader. Got a new book, I am gone until I finish the last page. Don't even bother trying to talk to me. And my best friend, back when I was a kid, still my best friend now, was the same way. And we would just quietly vanish into our books and come out when we were done. And it was great. It's a wonderful way to read because you're fully in the world. And now I miss that. I miss the fact that if I try to do the total immersion reading, somebody is going to tell me that somebody else broke her Lego or that she really, really needs some raspberries or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Speaking of children, I love this question from Anonymous. I noticed in a few of your books, The Secret Place and The Searcher, there are teenagers or children who take center stage or play an important role in the book. What do you find most interesting about the dynamic of a young person as a character in the mystery genre? Okay, and it's from Kayla.
Oh, that is a really
Isn't
interesting
that
question.
great? Yeah.
I have actually asked myself that question a couple of times, and I'm not entirely sure. With the teenagers, I think one thing is that I'm really interested in the liminal, because I think these are probably the most interesting points in our lives when we're in transition in some way, when we're moving as teenagers are from childhood into adulthood, and we're reforming ourselves into some new phase of life. But it's also, these are also the most vulnerable points, the most dangerous ones, because we're in between two stages, so we don't have a foot firmly in either world. And we were talking earlier about, you know, books like, or films like The Wicker Man, things like that, where they've got that liminal feel where you're between worlds, and it's a dangerous place to be. And that's why I think teenagers are interesting, because there's this huge power to where they are. They're coming into this whole new force within themselves. There's just entirely new sides of themselves exploding into existence. But it's dangerous because they don't really know where they are, and they're no longer children, and they haven't got the hang of adulthood yet. And it's a very vulnerable place to be. So I think that's fascinating to explore and very powerful. And childhood, I've also written child characters, but that's kind of a different thing. What I like with those is that childhood's very much a different world. And I'm thinking of how that best friend and I, when we were 7, 8, 9, we were in our own world. The adults were basically nice, fluffy presences somewhere who occasionally fed us and occasionally did annoying things like
The
demanding
Charlie
money.
Brown. Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah, exactly. They were sources of food and minor annoyance. And I think there's something amazing about the fact that kids do have their own world, which has their own priorities, which have nothing to do with adult priorities. Like if you ask an adult and a child to describe the exact same series of events, they're going to have seen totally different things because totally different things matter to them. But they have their own rules and their own thought processes. And I think that's fascinating to revisit that world and remember what it looks like and see how it interacts with the adult world.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's why.
I have to say, and there's speaking of children, teens, etc., and books, because we've had a few questions of books you might recommend. I would have to say The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin is one of my all-time favorites, and I wanted to name my daughter Tabitha Ruth, who's the lead character. They call her Turtle, but it's a mystery set in this weird apartment complex, and it has teens, and she's probably about 12, I think, and it was the first book I read where, I mean, it pops to all these different peoples are trying to solve this mystery. And I remember thinking it was the first time where I was like, oh, grown-ups have lives of their own and different thoughts of their own, because she very bravely, it's for a YA book, but goes into a lot of adults' characters and their fears and their motivations. And so that's my throw out for a book rec, and because it is technically YA, I guess, but it doesn't. That's the book I reread over and over again.
Yeah, that still works. That still works because I remember reading it. I probably only, I don't know when I read it, but I remember being quite confused a lot of the time, but really loving it anyway. I think my equivalent, where I suddenly realized how complicated adults were and that they had their own complicated lives going on, was the Once and Future King, which is the King Arthur saga to end all King Arthur saga.
Yes.
Yeah, isn't it? And my mum gave it to me. I was 10 and she gave it to me. We were flying from, I think, Malawi to Rome, which is a very long flight. My mum's dealing with 2 kids and she knew that with me, because of the total immersion thing, if she gave me a really big, thick book, that would shut me up for the flight and she would only have to deal with my brother. This is in a pre-iPad era, so long flights with kids.
Oh my God.
So she gave me the Once and Future King and that shut me up. But it is definitely not child aimed at kids, but it's so beautifully written. Again, the rhythm of the sentences, the ring of them, the sonority, but it's just beautifully written. But it also was my first experience of a book that showed the complexity of adults and how they can feel so many things at once, because kids are relatively wholehearted. They can be so utterly furious or utterly joyful. And it was my first kind of insight into the fact that adults could be feeling 7 conflicting things at once and dealing with the combination of emotions. And I still remember reading that on that plane. So that was my equivalent of the Westing Games. Man, adults are people. Whoa.
Oh, who knew? And here we are now.
Yeah.
Are we at the end of our time, my friend?
We are unfortunately out of time, but this has been such an amazing conversation. Tana, any last words?
No, just thank you so much to all of you for showing up and for reading. And I have needed books more than ever over the last year and a half for obvious reasons, because God knows we all need occasionally a moment that takes us out of the world that we're dealing with. And I've been really grateful to the authors who did that for me, and I really hope that my books have done the same for some of you guys. So thank you.
I've had multiple
thank you
friends.
You guys. Sorry, well, thank you so much to you guys at the Harvard Bookshop, and huge thank you to Gillian. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Gillian, thank you so much for being here. I know you are extremely busy. Tana, you as well. I've had multiple friends texting me tonight being like, they're so amazing in conversation. They're fantastic. I want this conversation to go on. I wish it could. One of my colleagues at Harvard
we need to have like a weekly Zoom pub crawl or something and just talk about
please.
A pint and a chat, yeah. Because I think we need to have, I think it's going to be an argument, but I think we totally need to have that conversation with the Princes in the Tower.
Yes, I can't wait. I'm in.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in tonight, and thank you everyone at home. I'm so sorry if we didn't get to your question. We had so many questions tonight. But thank you very much for asking all the same. And thank you for tuning in and showing up for authors, publishers, indie bookselling, and the incredible staff at Harvard Bookstore. Check out the chat if you are interested in purchasing an additional copy of The Searcher or checking out our our recorded events. Thank you again for being here, and have a great rest of your night, everybody. Take care. From Harvard Bookstore, be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.